Hello, everybody, and welcome to another exciting episode of the Paperback Warrior podcast. My name is Eric, and I'm your host for this episode. This podcast is connected to the Paperback Warrior blog, where you can find 3 to 4 new reviews weekly, an archive of over 1,500 reviews, plus the Paperback Warrior YouTube channel that boasts nearly 200 videos now. Be sure to subscribe and follow us on social media outlets like X, Facebook, Thread, and Instagram. Today's episode takes us way out west to cover a prolific Western author named Grover C. Gulick, better known as Bill Gulick. He authored a ton of Western stories in the Pulp magazines in the 1940s and 1950s. He served for 2 years as the president of Western Writers of America. He won Spur Awards. He earned accolades from the Cowboy Hall of Fame. I'm going to tell you all about him, the books and stories he wrote. I'm also going to review a 1958 crime-noir paperback titled Vice Trap. The book comes out this Friday in a new edition on Black Gat Books, which is an imprint of Stark House Press. But first off, let's talk about some new stuff coming out later this month, and also a look ahead to next month. Hard Case Crime is publishing The Get Off, the third and final installment in Krista Foss's series starring former porn star turned crime fighter Angel Dare. She first appeared in Money Shot, which was published in 2008. That book was nominated for an Edgar Award for Best Paperback Original. Angel Dare appeared again in the novel Chokehold in 2011. Now, after all these years, the series finally comes to an end. I haven't read these books, but author Paul Bishop recommended them to me a few months ago when we were discussing the author's Fringe television tie-in novels. She wrote 3 of those. This new novel, again, the title is called The Get Off, and it's set for release from Hard Case Crime on March 18th. Also in March is the Collected Will Eisner's John Law graphic novel collection. This is being released by Hard Case Crime in collaboration with Titan Comics. Now, John Law was a detective designed to be a self-published comic created by Will Eisner back in 1948. Most of the original artwork for this character was instead used for Eisner's popular character, the Spirit. Now, this collection features the 2004 reboot stories authored by Gary Challoner and original stories by Eisner. There's also a foreword by Eisner's longtime publisher, Dennis Kitchen. It's 128 pages. You can get it on March 4th from Hard Case Crime. Again, it's called The Collected Will Eisner's John Law. One that just came out a few days ago is a new edition of Teddy's War. This is a World War II novel authored by Donald Willerton. It was originally published in 2020. This new edition is being published by Rough Edges Press, new cover, and it's an ebook and a paperback. The synopsis is a man named Elias is learning more and more about his father, Teddy, a World War II hero who returned home, married his high school sweetheart, and lived the American dream. But Elias uncovers letters, videos, and hidden memories that were far, far more brutal than anyone could imagine. Will uncovering the past bring Elias peace, or will it shatter everything he knows about his family? The author, again, Donald Willerton, he's written 14 books, including Death in the Tall Grass, The King of Trash, and Smoke Dreams. But again, this new book is called Teddy's War, and it was released last week. Coming out this Friday is The Sister of Cain, written by Mary Collins. This was originally published in 1943, and it's being released by Stark House Press in a beautiful trade paperback. I love the cover. It's got an intro by Curtis Evans. I'll read you the synopsis on this one. With her husband David away during wartime, Hilda travels west to San Francisco to stay with her 6 sisters. But all is not well. 5 of the sisters are ruled by the oldest, Pauline, who controls them all through intimidation and blackmail. Their father's will left Pauline in control of the family fortune, and only a marriage can break the trust. Now Hilda finds herself pitted against Pauline to get hers and David's share of the money. In spite of their fear of Pauline, the sisters put up a united front to the world. Then one night, Pauline is found murdered by a knife from the family kitchen. Now secrets are being revealed, and Hilda finds herself in the middle of it. So it comes as no surprise when she finds the sisters all pointing their finger at her as the prime suspect. Again, this is The Sister of Cain by Mary Collins, out this Friday on Stark House Press. Also next month, Stark House Press is publishing Switcheroo by Emmett McDowell. This is going to be Black Gat book number 68. The book was originally published as an ace double back in 1954, but who wants to read a ratty, smelly, yellow paperback when they can have this brand new, crisp paperback with the original artwork included? Sign me up for that. The synopsis says, after her criminal husband is murdered, Corinne inherits his fortune. Then she disappears. And if she isn't going to collect, the fortune falls to her nephew-in-law, little Steve. He wants to confirm what everyone seems to believe, that Corinne is either long gone or stone cold dead. That's where Louisiana detective Jamie McRae comes in. Is there a lot more going on here than a missing Harris? Again, this is called Switcheroo by Emmett McDowell. It's out next month, and I don't have the specific date on it just yet. Looking ahead to tomorrow's Wolfpack Publishing new release means I have to look back in time. I write and record these episodes weeks and sometimes even months in advance. While preparing for this episode, I learned of author Stephen Mertz's death on November 6th. Steve, who I referred to by his nickname, Mojo, was a good friend of mine. It seemed like each time one of these podcast episodes aired, he would reach out to me via Facebook Messenger. He loved these episodes, and he loved reading the Paperback Warrior reviews on the blog. He often made comments on the Facebook groups and Messenger about the authors and books that we reviewed, and he offered me suggestions on other books to try as well. I even managed to turn him on to a book or two, which is rare considering his level of experience. As I've mentioned here on this show several times, and it bears repeating, Stephen Mertz is one of the reasons Paperback Warrior exists. His books were my very first written reviews. I wrote book reports in elementary and middle school on his MIA Hunter series, which he collaborated on with several authors while also writing his own installments. My English teacher, well, she found the books pretty bizarre, but she was happy that I was putting in the extra credit on my grade for submitting the book reports. In my opinion then and now, Stephen Mertz wrote better books than any Shakespeare play. He was my kind of writer. My family and I had the pleasure of visiting Mojo in 2023 at his home outside Tombstone, Arizona. He took us on quite the day trip, showing us the beauty of southeastern Arizona, a place that he just loved so much. Mertz had great stories throughout the day about his early writing career, his apprenticeship with Don Pendleton, his friendship with Linda Pendleton. They were both huge Ricky Nelson fans. They swapped tapes back and forth. On that day and in prior conversations, he had wonderful things to say about Ed Gorman, Max Allan Collins, James Reasoner, Robert Randizzi, Michael Avallone, and Joe Lansdale. He was an icon in the small liberal community of Bisbee, where he played Howling Dog Blues. I read and reviewed a number of Mertz novels here on the show and on the blog, but most recently I read his short story, The King of Horror, on episode number 107, just 3 weeks prior to his death. He contacted me and he was thrilled that I read his story, and he felt that I did a good job with the narration. In fact, he promised me and the family bottles of soda pop on his dime the next time I saw him. He often promised me soda pop, that was his thing. Stephen Mertz's new book is out tomorrow as an ebook. The title is Sarah and the Mad Dog. I remember him talking about just starting the outline back in 2023 when we were in his office. The book is set in New York City in 1932. The Great Depression grips the nation. The city streets are alive with machine gun fire and ruthless gangsters. Sarah Carter, the lead singer of the Carter family, arrives from Tennessee to perform at the famed Carnegie Hall. Her first hour in the city takes an unexpected turn when a thief targets her beloved auto harp and a dashing, silver-tongued stranger swoops in to save the day. What Sarah doesn't know is that her gallant rescuer is none other than Mad Dog Call, a notorious gangster at the center of a bloody gang war. As the night unfolds, Sarah is thrust into the deep, deadly underworld of rival mob bosses, corrupt cops, and Mad Dog's dangerously jealous girlfriend. Experience the tension, romance, and raw grit of 1930s crime noir in this spellbinding journey. Again, this is Sarah and the Mad Dog, out tomorrow in ebook. Unfortunately, it's Stephen Mertz's last book, but he's left behind a legacy of series titles like Cody's War, Cody's Army, MIA Hunter, Blaze, Kilroy, and action-packed standalone novels like The Moses Deception, The Korean Intercept, Homicide Saigon, Blood Red Sun, Dragon Games, Castro Directive. Mertz wrote horror, he wrote action-adventure, thrillers, mysteries, westerns, and he wrote them with the best of them. But he'll always be remembered as one of the cornerstones of Mac Bolan and the Executioner series, post Don Pendleton. His Executioner novels are some of the most beloved installments of the series. Mojo, I wish you could message me after this episode airs. You'll be missed, my friend. Alright, so turning the script page here, how about some intro music to tuck us into today's feature? Here comes the soft jam. In my opener, I announced today's feature is on Bill Gulick. He authored a lot of Western stories in the Pulp magazines in the 1940s and 1950s. He wrote fiction, nonfiction, and remained a mainstay in the glossy magazines for decades. He served for 2 years as the president of Western Writers of America. He won Spur Awards, and he earned the accolades from the Cowboy Hall of Fame. Pull up the reins and let's sit a spell with Bill Gulick. Bill Gulick's actual name is Grover C. Gulick. He was born in 1916 in Kansas City, Missouri. Both of his parents were educated. His father was a veterinarian. As a child, Gulick was an avid reader with weekly trips to the library. By the age of 5, he was reading Zane Grey and Pulp Western magazines. In high school, he wrote a story modernizing Julius Caesar with a gritty underworld of Chicago gangsters. Gulick graduated high school in 1934, a time when America had been thrust into the Great Depression. Gulick delivered newspapers, he did collections on delinquent utility bills, and he worked at a drugstore to just help the family make ends meet. Gulick enrolled at the University of Oklahoma, played baseball, and as a sophomore, he entered a writing competition and had his poem win top prize. During college, Gulick worked as a power line installer, and he also took a job selling appliances for Montgomery Ward. Both of these jobs expanded Gulick's world and allowed him to see a good portion of the Midwest. Hoping to achieve a career in writing, Gulick entered a professional writing school in 1940, and he sold his first story for $10 to a law officer magazine titled The Peace Officer. He then reached out to popular publications in New York about a Western story he wrote. They published the story in New Western magazine and paid him $30. I believe the name of the story was The Kid That Rode with Death. At this point, Gulick considered himself to be a full-fledged professional writer. Gulick moved to Brownwood, Texas to be a caretaker for a couple's cabin on Lake Brownwood. It was here that he had the opportunity for solitude, a time he used to polish up on his writing and to get completely devoted to his style. He wanted to write for the slick magazines. He later spent a lot of time with pulp writer Foster Harris. It was Harris that encouraged Gulick to use his experiences installing power lines to write stories about hardened, blue-collar working men. Harris explained that he used his own work experience in the oil fields to pen stories in Argosy, Blue Book, and Adventure. Gulick took the advice to heart, and he wrote a story titled You Gotta Be Hard, about a lineman who saves a fellow worker from being electrocuted. He sold it to Adventure for $75, and it was published in their August 1942 issue. These stories are what Gulick refers to as his high-line stories, about the dangerous industry and hardened men that worked on power lines. That same year, he had his story The Saga of Mike Shannon published in Liberty magazine. The publisher paid him $350 for that story, which was his biggest payout to date. Gulick was classified as 4F during World War II due to his bout with polio years before the war started. In 1943, Gulick moved to New York City so he could be closer to the editors and publishers he was dealing with. By this point, Gulick had sold stories to Big Book Western, 44 Western, Ace High Western, Texas Rangers, 10-Story Western, Liberty, and Adventure. One of the characters he used quite frequently in the stories is Juan Ibanez, a Mexican cowboy living in southern Texas with his girlfriend Rosita and a horse named Diablo. Now, Juan was a man who hated working, but he loved tequila. The stories gained the attention of a Hollywood producer who paid Gulick $500 for a 6-month option for the film. After 2 or 3 years, the producer finally gave up, and the stories were never adapted to screen, but Gulick made money. Gulick became acquainted with Rogers Terrell, who was working as an editor for Henry and Harry Steger, the owners of popular publications. At the height of the pulp boom, the Stegers had 33 magazines circulating, including Adventure, Argosy, Westerns, detective pulps, romance, and love stories. Each magazine sold on average of 200,000 newsstand copies for a dime each, so the difference between showing a profit and incurring a loss was small. According to Gulick's autobiography, the Stegers were earning about $300 net profit per month on each magazine. Their top Western writer was Walt Coburn. He had a story in just about every Western magazine, either a 25,000-word novel, a 12,000-word novelette, or a 5,000-word short story. Rogers Terrell once sent Gulick a letter stating that his stories were good and that they would continue fetching on average of $280. He said that they were competent but not very original. He encouraged Gulick to stop writing run-of-the-mill potbowlers and to use his talent to write better work. Gulick went back to thinking of himself as more of a slick writer and found more stories being published in Liberty and Saturday Evening Post through the 1940s and 1950s. In fact, he had 13 stories in Saturday Evening Post in his career. He was also published in Esquire, Blue Book, Collier's, and Nation's Business. By 1944, Gulick found that he had had enough of New York, that he met and introduced himself to enough publishers and editors at that point. He could continue a successful writing career outside of the big city, so he moved to Oklahoma first. Then, in 1945, he relocated to Tacoma, Washington. From there, he continues to sell to Liberty magazine, making about $750 per story. The rejects from Liberty funneled down to the Pulp magazines at less money. In 1946, Gulick discovered something really interesting about a Lone Ranger comic strip that was running in Seattle's post-intelligence paper. The Lone Ranger story was nearly scene for scene the exact same thing that Gulick had wrote in a Western short story for a 10-story Western magazine. He cut out the strips each day until he had the whole story. He then mailed it to popular publications, who felt that it was plagiarism. Eventually, the Lone Ranger's legal firm settled with Gulick, paying him $250 and paying $250 to popular publications. In a funny send-off to the settlement, Gulick volunteered to write Lone Ranger stories, but his request was ignored. Gulick met his wife while working as a house manager for a Tacoma theater company, and the two moved to New York. After meeting with the editor of Saturday Evening Post, Erd Brandt, Gulick was pitched the idea of writing his first serial. Gulick knew that was huge money, as Ernest Haycox and Luke Short had both earned upwards to $50,000 for a serial. Brand wanted a historical Pacific Northwest setting for the serial. In his research, Gulick became fascinated with the history of the immigrants into the Washington and Idaho territories from the Oregon Trail days. Gulick used the concept to write an 80,000-word novel titled Bend of the Snake. It was Gulick's first full-length novel, but when he pitched it to the Post as a serial, they rejected it for being too long for a serial. He submitted the novel to Doubleday, but it was rejected for not being violent enough. But a publisher called Houghton Mifflin did publish the book in 1950, and Gulick received a $5,000 movie option. Universal International bought the film rights, changed the title, and cast James Stewart in the lead role. Gulick did end up writing a serial for the Post around the same time. It was titled The Man from Texas. This kicked off Gulick writing full-length novels. His next books were A Drum Calls West and 1,000 for the Caribou. Gulick had tried selling 1,000 for the Caribou to both Saturday Evening Post and Collier's as a serial, but they declined it. Gulick said in his autobiography that Collier's denied the novel, stating that in some ways Bill Gulick was better than Luke Short, but Gulick felt that he must not have been good enough to replace Luke Short. But he did sell 1,000 for the Caribou to Toronto Star Weekly, making $1,200 before the novel was published by Houghton Mifflin. I'm not even sure if I'm saying that name right. His next book was Conquest, which was changed to the title of The Conqueror's Lady and sold to Saturday Evening Post for $3,750. The book was bought as a film option and courted by the likes of Jed Harris, a successful Broadway producer, and a Walt Disney writer and composer. But the deal never worked out, so Gulick wrote a play based on the book. Around the same time, an anthology of Gulick's Mountain Man Western stories was collected into an omnibus paperback titled The Mountain Men. In 1953, Gulick joined the Western Writers of America, the brainchild of author Nelson Nye. In 1955, Gulick ran for president of the organization, a position he held in 1956 and 1957. But this position had quite a few hassles. One of them was concerning a writer named Archie Jocelyn, who had admitted to plagiarizing Luke Short's novel and serial titled Blood on the Moon. At the time, Jocelyn was still being published in the low-paying markets. His agent wanted to rehabilitate him by making him a member of the Western Writers of America. The agent threatened to sue the organization if they denied Jocelyn's membership. The decision came down to Gulick either taking on this suspicious writer or seeing the WWA being sued. Gulick sent a letter to the agent stating the denial of membership and the words, "Sue and be damned." Another issue that came up was censorship in Westerns. The idea of injecting sex into a Western was a hot debate. The idea was that if sex is naturally brought in, it's okay. It can't just be made up to fit in the book. The final decision was to let the publisher be the judge. If they accepted the author's work, then the Western Writers of America would as well. Another issue that Gulick faced with the Western Writers of America was what type of Western writers should be allowed membership. Nelson Nye had set the rule that the writer must have had 3 Western novels published to be accepted as a voting member. The non-voting membership was reserved for Western writers that sold stories to magazines, or it could be Western editors and publishers. The question was what to do with college professors and authors of non-fiction articles and books. The outcome was to allow them to become members to broaden the membership base. The idea behind it was to allow any person interested in the West professionally to become a member. Another issue for writers at the time was really poor sales contracts. Gulick stated in his autobiography that Phoenix Press paid writers $200 per book, and they kept all rights to the book, and they paid no royalties on sold books. Plus, the writer had to grant Phoenix the option on the next book for the exact same terms. Gulick didn't like that, and he urged the organization to meet with the Screenwriters Guild, the Mystery Writers of America, and the Authors League to come up with a template for a recommended contract. This gave the Western Writers of America members a standard to go by. In the Western Writers of America, Gulick befriended Norman Fox, and the two were friends up until Fox's death 6 years later. Gulick wrote a novel titled The Land Beyond before being offered a new type of deal. The deal was to write a shorter novel as a paperback original. Remember, this was the mid-20th century, and paperback books were really becoming the in thing for publishers. Popular Library pitched an idea for Gulick to write a paperback for them, and he came up with Showdown in the Sun. That paperback was published by Famous Artist, a Hollywood film company that paid $13,500 for the book. Gulick also began selling rights to his short stories to television shows. In 1961, Gulick sold his story, Where the Wind Blows Free, to Saturday Evening Post for $2,500. Gulick wrote novels for Doubleday, including They Came to a Valley, which won the Cowboy Hall of Fame Western Heritage Award as Best Western Historical Novel of the Year, and Hallelujah Trail, which the Mirisch brothers bought film rights for $85,000. The movie was released in 1964 and starred Burt Lancaster, Donald Pleasance, and Brian Keefe. The author also wrote The Liveliest Town in the West for Doubleday in 1969. He wrote a contemporary novel titled The Country Club Caper in 1971. Gulick also flourished in the nonfiction realm as well. He wrote the books Snake River Country and Chief Joseph Country as nonfiction historical accounts. Gulick also wrote a western for Doubleday titled Trails West about a gold mine in Hell's Canyon and anti-Chinese riots in the 1880s. The book, which was published in 1979, did well but hinted to Gulick that the western book market had dwindled significantly. In 1988, Gulick's western trilogy was caught up in a publishing feud with Doubleday. The publisher wanted each book to be trimmed from 100,000 words to 85,000. The publisher also argued about using Gulick's overall title for the trilogy as Northwest Destiny. Doubleday published each of the books in 1988, the first in May titled Distant Trails, the second in June titled Gathering Storm, and the third in July titled Lost to Wallowa. The publisher sold 5,000 copies of each book to libraries without any promotion and then let the books go out of print. Gulick was able to have the rights reverted back to him from Doubleday. Berkeley Books then reached out to Gulick asking if they could do all three books as paperbacks, which they did, and the books earned much better sales than the original Doubleday fiasco. Gulick's 1991 nonfiction book was Roadside History of Oregon, and it sold 21,000 copies, but Gulick claimed he didn't know where the signed contract was and how the royalties were working out on it. In the late 90s, Gulick, still fascinated with rivers, wrote a 3-book trilogy of Western tales about the Columbia River, published by Colorado Press. But the publisher refused the 4th book. He also wrote a nonfiction book in 1999 titled Manhunt, The Pursuit of Harry Tracy. Now, Bill Gulick died at the age of 97 in 2013 in Walla Walla, Washington. In his autobiography, his final conclusion stated this: "What the world of writing will be in time to come, I cannot predict, other than to say it will change, as it has in my lifetime. Despite the proliferation in the methods of communication that's taken place during the last 64 years, the nation as a whole is no more literate now than it was then, when almost everybody who had gone to school at all could read at the 4th grade level, whereas now we have students in college who cannot do as well. Back in the 1950s, when I complained to Carl Brandt Sr. about the way the TV monster that had invaded our living rooms was threatening to replace my beloved Saturday Evening Post, he wrote, 'Don't worry about it, Bill. What you should understand is that the American public has a great capacity for accepting a new medium of entertainment without forsaking the old. In any event, it's time for a new generation of writers to replace mine. All I can say is, I wish you well.'" Gulick's last published short story was in 1982, and his last book was published in 2008. My references for this feature was the 2006 Caxton Press book titled 64 Years as a Writer by Bill Gulick, the Online Fiction Mags Index, archive.org, pulp.net, and Archives West Orbis Cascade Alliance. All right, so the last portion of today's episode is a review. As I stated earlier, I'm presenting a review for a 1958 paperback titled Vice Trap, written by Elliot Gilbert. It's out this week on Black Gat Books, which is an imprint of Starkhouse Press. This reprint preserves the original paperback's cover by Harry Scher, which is really cool. I know very little about this author. He wrote 2 other books, names of them here: Don't Push Me Around for Popular Library, which was in 1955, and Too Much Woman for Beacon in 1961. The book is presented in first person by a guy named Nick. Now, Nick served a few months in jail after being busted by a narc named Madrid. After jail, Nick begins this life of small jobs as a mechanic. He plays poker and he smokes a lot of weed. Oddly, the guy who busted him, Madrid, still has a cordial relationship with him. Madrid comes by to tell Nick that he has some bills that he needs to get paid off. He needs some dough quickly. He gets Nick to fence a few items like a radio and a camera. Nick knows Madrid is a crooked cop and probably just stole these items from criminals or maybe some kind of personal property locker. Nick fences the items because it allows him to see Lona, his former lover. Now, Nick and Lona were hot and heavy back in the day before Nick went to jail. While he was behind bars, Madrid was under the covers with Lona. Both Madrid and Lona are now an item, but Nick rekindles a relationship with Lona behind Madrid's back. Together, the two get high, drink beer, and pine for yesteryear. Madrid pitches to Nick a bank heist idea. Nick gets a couple of his friends together, including a charismatic guy named Sando. The deal is to knock off a bank during a rodeo parade. Madrid will volunteer to patrol the parade off-duty and make a cover for the guys to rob the place. Then Nick will need to floor the ford across the border before the gates close. By the way, the book is set in Southern California, right near the border of Mexico. But as these things play out in Paperback Heist, things go afoul, and by the book's end, there's murder and lots of hospital bills. Vice Trap was a pretty good crime noir novel. The inner workings of drug deals for weed in the mid-20th century was fascinating, but now it seems pretty laughable. The stuff that they go through just to buy weed is crazy, considering you could just basically go to the store now. Petty crimes leading to unrest, really kind of silly. The bulk of the book focuses on Nick and Lona's relationship, their longing for peaceful days, and the reality that both of them are caught in life's sinking wheel rut. Madrid makes a great heel. Nick serves the role as sort of a slacking rebel. But the book is really a slow burn at 178 pages. I mean, the heist pitch, it doesn't even occur until the 60-page mark. But if you want to submerge yourself in sort of a druggy lifestyle of the 1950s, there's plenty to keep your attention. It's a really solid read in that regard. So I recommend Vice Trap. Again, that book comes out this Friday, and I'll also have a written review of this book next week on the blog. And that's a solid wrap to this week's episode. I'm all tapped out now. Thank you so much for listening. And again, I'll be back in 2 weeks to celebrate Black History Month with a very, very special episode. I'm looking forward to presenting that one to you, and I hope you'll be there for it. In the meantime, be sure to visit paperbackwarrior.com because, honestly, there's reviews going up there almost every day now. I have a bunch of reviews working, so check that out. Be back in 2 weeks, and enjoy whatever it is that you're doing. Bye for now.